Welcome to another Cruyff Football Player Development Project Masterclass webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. We're very pleased to be here, and tonight we're absolutely thrilled to have Todd Beane from Cruyff Football in Barcelona join us to share his knowledge, experience and insights into the world of player development. Before we begin tonight's webinar, I'd like to ask you all if you could put a message into the chat box just to check that our audio is working and that you're receiving us loud and clear. So if you can start firing through just a hello or anything, we'll get those through shortly and then we can continue. While we're waiting for those responses, I just want to give you a little bit of background about Player Development Project. It was founded to challenge the thinking, practices and culture surrounding youth football. The project gives a voice to pioneers of player development with the most progressive coaches, academics and development specialists providing insights into the latest ideas and examples of best practice. At the start of 2015, we partnered up with our good friends at Cruyff Football in Barcelona, and after a lot of discussion with those guys, we both agreed that we had a similar message to promote and wanted to combine our efforts to promote positive player development around the world. Now, this is a particularly exciting time for us at PDP, since just a few days ago we launched our brand new online marketplace at playerdevelopmentproject.com. We've created a central point for coaches to read, watch and discuss the latest ideas around player development. Firstly, we've launched our blog market. We believe it's the only blog you'll ever need for player development. We've brought together many of the top writers and bloggers from the football world into one convenient place, and the list of contributors is always growing. It's our objective to continue to network so that we get the best possible contributors on our blog. We've also developed what we believe to be as a world-first platform, and we call that the expert market. This is a one-on-one calling service which enables our community to book a one-on-one Skype call with some of the best coaches, researchers and influencers in the business. And the same as the blog, we're looking to network with as many top coaches as we can in the future and bring in a bigger network into that expert market for your benefit. The Player Development Project magazine, which is now 8 issues old and issue 9 is very close to being released, is now published exclusively through the website, so it's entirely web-based, and we believe this is a much better reading experience for our community no matter what device you're on. After providing the magazine for free for the last 6 months, we now have a range of affordable membership options, and you can subscribe to our premium content through there. We look to interview top players, top coaches, as well as provide the latest academic research from around the world of football and player development. The new membership model will ensure we can continue to produce content for our audience. And finally, our regular Masterclass webinar series will continue as a key part of our offering. We believe the live Q&A format with open discussion is a great way to engage our community and provide real value. Please jump onto the website at playerdevelopmentproject.com and check it out when you get a chance. And now really I want to move things forward. So for tonight's webinar, as I said, we've got Todd Beane, co-founder of Cruyff Football. He's live with us from Barcelona. My colleague James Vaughan, who's the lead researcher at C14 PDP. We've got in the background Adam Wright, who's our CEO and has edited the magazine previously. He's running the show behind the scenes there. And obviously myself, Dave Wright, I'm the COO at Player Development Project and also work on the magazine. And I coach football here in London at Brentford Football Club. Todd, I want to start with you and welcome. First of all, and before we do begin, I want to pass on our best wishes to Johan at the moment. Obviously, he's got a bit of a battle ahead of him, but we're all with him, and we're all sending our best to him. So hopefully that can be relayed to him.
Yeah, I'll make sure to get that message to him. Thanks for saying so.
Fantastic. If you can give us a little bit of your background, I guess, how you got from the USA to Barcelona and your connections with Cruyff.
Yeah, I mean, my journey's from born and raised in the northeast corner of the United States, chasing an ice hockey puck around at first and into football, and then going through just about every facet of American football in another lifetime ago. Youth, club, university, into pro ranks there, and then into the coaching ranks through the U.S. Soccer Federation A license program, and then I left and traveled the world through Costa Rica, and eventually in 2002 here to Barcelona to work with Johan Cruyff for the last 14 years. So yeah, it's the longest place I've lived in now in Barcelona, but to be honest, my roots are back in the Northeast, and then more recently out on the West Coast of the United States. So a little bit of everything by this point.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I'll pass over to James. A little bit about you for those who haven't been with us on one of the webinars before. Jim, can you give us some background around your research and a little bit about yourself and your football background?
Yeah, sure. So my research comes from my experiences as a youngster playing football, really. Um, I grew up in the UK and was in the academy system for a number of years, and I suppose, like a lot of coaches these days and a lot of players, dropped out due to injury, and then ended up coming over to New Zealand and started studying coaching, at which point I started to kind of learn a little bit more about the academy culture and the structure, and the motivation behind players' journey, if you like, and the role that incentives play in shaping players' motivation. And that kind of snowballed now to looking at how the environment that coaches and clubs create can really influence a player's development journey, and also influence their ability to be creative on the pitch at the same time. So yeah, so now I'm looking at a PhD which hopes to understand how we create environments that allow players to be more creative, and how cultural values really impact that, because I think that for me it's kind of the heart, that's where everything comes from.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and having known you for a long time, Jim, I know how passionate you are about that research. A little bit about myself. I've been coaching for about 13 years. I'm up here in the UK, having coached in New Zealand and Australia. Been involved, obviously, with Player Development Project for just over a year. And I'm up here finishing my A license, hopefully in the next 12 months, and working at Brentford. So it's been a very interesting 3 years working in the academy system in London. Great learning experience. So we'll move on, and I want to go to Todd first. Total football and Johan Cruyff's philosophy. It's obviously something that changed the way football's played. It's something that is obviously a cornerstone of what you guys do at Cruyff Football. Can you elaborate a little bit on, I guess, the innovation and creativity that goes with total football, and do you believe there's room for creativity in football these days?
You know, I think you have this great debate, and I think unapologetically, Johan has come out on a very romantic side and a romantic vision of football. It seems like we've kind of put ourselves in two camps there. The camp of, results matter, and that's all that matters in football. And then you have coaches still today, whether it's Pellegrini, Man City, or Johan, of course, as a spokesman for a romantic side of football, which is people come for the spectacle. They come for the flair. They come for those moments that excite the crowd. And most people, according to a Cruyff philosophy, would prefer to see a 5-4 match than a 0-0 draw. So I have to say, unapologetically, we're approaching it very romantically about results can come, but it's not just about how the scoreline ends up, but also about how the game is played. And I don't pretend to speak for Johan, but it has been a pleasure working for him for 14 years, because he speaks as eloquently behind the scenes about that passion, about creativity, creating the Marco van Bastens, the Dennis Bergkamps, those types of players, Romarios, the Stoichkov, the players that he's coached and the players that he's been part of course, in '74, are still known today as to be some of the creative players in the game. And I think everybody chooses, their own poison, so to speak. But for sure, we're approaching the way that we look at youth development as an opportunity to give people, young children, the skills that are required to show themselves and to come out with some sense of flair when they have the moment to perform. And that's our agenda.
In a practical sense, how is that sort of done by Cruyff Football? So in your programs or in the way you operate, how is that done to enable creativity and really sort of let those players have a chance? Because I think I remember speaking to Caleb Porter of the Portland Timbers. We interviewed him and said, how do you coach creativity? And he said, I don't think you can. I think you have to enable or allow creativity through your coaching. So through Cruyff Football, how do you guys go about allowing that opportunity?
Yeah, I think it comes down to starting with, if you're a coach or you're a club or an academy, I think it comes down to what you hope to nurture, right? I'm a father of 6 children now, and you choose how you're going to parent. If you're looking to be about discipline, you'll choose every methodology to approach a disciplined structure in your home. If you want to approach a different ideal, then you go for this. So what we do is we identify, and this is from Johan Cruyff, we identify the type of football, we call that total football, that we want. It's about ball control, it's about movement, it's about position play, but it's also about behavior, It's about preparation. It's about mindset. So I think if you set the ideal that you would like a player that can think and make decisions under pressure and be able to execute that well under pressure, then I think you then start there and then backtrack and say, is the training you're providing now for your club or your players returning on that sort of ideal? And unfortunately, you know, I've seen a lot of places where they're looking for efficiency rather than creativity. So they train to train efficiency. I was reading an article still today, and in your neck of the woods, there's a great emphasis on physical training. Well, then result is I get players who can run up and down the park. And I had a Scottish coach that appreciated that work ethic. But in that time that was dedicated to physical training, I might have trained with the ball, for example. I might have trained decision making. I put more of a street kind of football matches within the structure of my facility. So I think you're right. Caleb's right in a sense. There is some innate qualities, but you know, having seen a lot of literature about this, we reap what we sow, so to speak. And I think if the training reflects what you're looking for, you can create the Iniestas and the Xavis of the world equally as you may create a player for you know, that's fit and can play the long ball.
Okay, and Jim, I want to bring you in here because obviously this is your area of expertise. Your thoughts around how you can create creative environments and how you can enable players. Do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, for sure. I just want to echo something that Todd said there about allowing players or helping players to show themselves, because the motivation behind creativity is interesting, and the simple way to think about it is we need to feel like we can express ourselves. And when people talk about coaching, they talk about being autonomy supportive, which is allowing the players to kind of have a voice in the session, really, and share their opinion. But the interesting thing is that autonomy is actually expression of self. So our job as coaches then has to be to develop the person inside, develop that idea of self. So what the kids value, what the players value, you know, things that run right the way from what you see on the pitch to what would normally be the domain of like a family off the pitch, or even the culture in terms of the values that are promoted. So for example, if we have a team culture, a club culture, or a wider culture that values, say, it's very traditional, and it values status, and it kind of asks players to conform, then that becomes the values that the player takes on board. And so when we give them the freedom to express themselves, what they end up doing is expressing that conformity, that tradition. So in that moment, they're not truly expressing themselves as much as they're expressing the team culture or the coach or their wider culture. So the trick becomes to promote good values within your training sessions, within your team culture and within your club culture. And you need values that align to creativity. So you need to be striving to engage the players. Training needs to be stimulating. It needs to be self-directed, which is again finding out what the players are interested in and letting them shape the session as much as you do. And this is difficult, and it requires like levels and levels of understanding and expertise from the coach, and also an air of humility at the same time, because we have to recognize that what the kids might be trying to do, what the players can see in a moment, is something that we might not be able to see. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong or that they shouldn't explore in that area. So yeah, it's a bit of a long-winded explanation there, mate. But I think the key values, we have to be sure of what we're reinforcing in the players, and what expectations that creates in their mind.
Okay, that's yeah, like you say, a very substantial answer, and I certainly agree with the sentiment of a team reflecting their coach, and whether that's behaviour or culture. I just want to go to a couple of questions in the room. Steve has said Bayern has scored 9 goals for every 1 conceded this season. Pep obviously fits within the romantic notion that Todd identified with. Todd, how much do you believe Pep's attitude is a result from of his relationship with Johan?
Well, I mean, I think Pep would have to answer that, but I've had the luxury of sitting around the kitchen table many times with Johan and Pep talking football, which has been a privilege for me. And I think Pep has probably answered that. I mean, he mentioned, in coming about Barcelona that it was Johan who had built the cathedral, and it was his responsibility to restore it. And I think that goes more than just a sentiment of respect. It goes to two gentlemen who talk football, who breathe football, who share a romantic passion for football, and they do so looking for that type of play, which is creative, which is dominating, possession-based, high pressure. And I think Steve also made reference to, as you mentioned, to the goal scored. I mean, I think, as I said, it's very clear that the objective is to score goals under that philosophy. And if you score more goals than your opponent, you're going to get the results that Pep has had or that Johan has had here at Barcelona as a coach. So, again, it comes down to what you're seeking, and if you're seeking the spectacular and you want to put the ball in the back of the net 4 times in the game, you'll do so. If you're more of a fan of Catenaccio from Italy, you'll score 1 and hope that's enough. And each of these are celebrated, and Johan's the first to say, listen, the beauty of football is being interpreted around the world in different ways, and it's not for one to decide that one is better. It's just the one to embrace that philosophy with which you identify most. And I think Pep and Johan in this case, both of them, they speak about a football which is about attacking, dynamic, taking advantage, position play, not giving the opponent opportunities, and seeing if you can't score, have Lewandowski come on and score 5 goals for you. I mean, or the goal that Neymar scored the other day, or if you saw the England match, Spain-England match just 2 nights ago, was it Mario Gaspar, the goal that Gaspar scored? I mean, these are creative moments that people remember, those types of goals and those types of victories, Maradonas of the past, and that's what people speak to when they speak of Cruyff. The people that talk to me that saw him live, they remember the creative moments. They may forget a score line, but they certainly remember the moments when a goal was scored or a miraculous feat was accomplished, the George Bests of the world. And so I think Pep and Johan share that very clearly, and very much so that as a mentee, Pep has come obviously well into his own and is taking it his own message to football and carrying it into Germany.
And another question, I know in academy football, and it varies country to country, we've got a question from Gary around when does the Cruyff philosophy recommend young players go and play 11v11 on a full-size pitch? Now, in academy football here, it could be 6v6, 7v7 for under 9s and 10s, and different clubs have different ideas. Is there sort of a set way that you guys work in terms of when you're putting systems in for clubs that you believe, certain ages should play certain numbers on a pitch?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that ends up being dictated by the federation, right? So, but having said that, I'll give you an example. When we went into Chivas in Guadalajara a few years back, they were playing 11v11 at 7 years old. We thought it was absolutely ridiculous, but it wasn't our decision to make. But what the federation says you must do on the weekend, if they're determining the numbers on the pitch, doesn't mean you have to train that way. Right, so even if you're playing 11-11 on the weekend at a ridiculous age like 7, which I hope they're going to change in Mexico, it doesn't mean you have to train that way. You can train any way you want. So we're really in favor of playing. Johan's an advocate of 6v6, and if you go to Holland now, they have what they call twin games. They're 6v6 matches on Wednesdays, where clubs are inviting other clubs to come along and play 6v6 matches in 1/4 of the pitch. Why? You're getting touches on the ball, you're getting more creativity, more looks at goal, and the kids are having a really dynamic experience and causing them to play in tight spaces, almost like you might play on the street a little bit. So we recommend playing a lot of small-sided games and doing so with a dynamic, creative, and adding restrictions so the players have to think and react and show that they can solve problems. Ultimately, we want a player that can resolve the issues that they're going to face on the field. And you can't have a coach screaming on the sideline as if it's American football what the next play is going to be. And to do that, you train that way. If you want that on the weekend, you need to train that way in a very functional way during the week.
Okay, and I've got a question for Mark around skill acquisition, and I want to aim this one at Jimmy. Just around technical training, how do you do it? And functional technique, application or isolation. And I know, Jimmy, you're a fan of games for understanding, and I just wanted to get your thoughts around that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll frame this within my understanding of two different types of creativity, since that's kind of what the topic that we're looking at the moment. So the two types are what's called psychological creativity and historical creativity. So psychological creativity is generally what happens when a player discovers something for the first time, and usually by themselves. So we can think about this in lots of different ways. The first time we do anything new with a ball that we've never done before, it's psychologically creative. So for example, the first time, let's say I'd never seen the Cruyff turn when I was a little kid, and I did the Cruyff turn. For me, that's a creative moment. Like, that's super engaging. I've tried something, it's just happened in the game, and it's worked for me. I get this. I get an ownership then over that skill. And if it's worked, then I'll look to do it again, and I'll look to refine it. And it becomes part of my kind of playing style, if you like. It's very easy for me then to take it on board because I've tried it and it's worked. And that's kind of, it's autonomy supportive in that way. But for the people watching, so say if Todd's watching me play, he's going, Jimmy Vaughan's just done a Cruyff turn, look at that. Because Todd knows the greater context of football. He's seen Johan do it on the pitch, and there's a name to it for him. So in that moment, whilst it's like psychologically creative for me, it's not historically creative. So what they say in the research is that as developing players and young kids, if we can stimulate more P creative, so psychologically creative moments in players' development, then they're more likely to lead to historically creative acts when they reach a certain level of expertise.
And do you think that happens within the game?
Sorry?
So do you think that happens within teaching games for understanding more than it does in a technique scenario or a repetition scenario? Do you think it's finding a balance?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say we're more likely to stimulate P or psychological creativity in a games for understanding environment. However, the most important thing there is that the kids are engaged and they're immersed in what they're doing. So again, the game's got to be something that they want to do. It's got to be something that interests them. It's got to be something that they feel is valuable to them as young players. And when we're talking about really young kids, it just needs to be super fun. But the flip side to this is that what if I could play for 20 years and I could never discover the Cruyff turn? I just might not be the type of player to discover that move. And therefore, it needs a coach's intervention. You know, Todd comes in and goes, and in a good way, you know, using a very player-centered coaching approach, comes in and goes, like, little Jimmy, did you know, there's something else you could do there. What were you trying to do? And I was trying to turn the defender. Well, could you use another part of your foot? What could you do? And eventually, through a bit of Q&A, maybe we get to the point whereby Todd goes, well, I've got something that might work for you, and he might demonstrate and show me the Cruyff turn. And if I've got a good relationship with Todd as a young player, and I enjoy and I enjoy his coaching, and we've got a good friendship, then I'm going to take that on board, and I might go away and practice that and then use it in games. So I think there's a real balance between creating the space for players to have this psychological creativity and experience things themselves for the first time, and then also knowing when to step in and make a coaching point, and to do it in a way that is autonomy supportive and player-centered and meets their needs, so that they take it on board. Because Todd could just run onto the pitch and go, little Jimmy, look at this, and he'll just do the Cruyff turn and goes, next time you just do that. And I'm going, well, and you know, as a little kid, I might not have seen it, and I'm going, all right, mate, thank you for that. Like, it's, you know, so hopefully that gives a bit of an example.
Yeah. I might pull a muscle by that point trying to demonstrate it.
Well, I want to go to another question because there's a few good ones coming through, and I want to try and get to as many of these as we can. Back to Todd, I think, with this one. A question from Simon around how much time do Barca or La Masia or C14 youth coaches? So, I mean, it's one of our questions on the agenda tonight to talk about whether there's a crossover between La Masia and what Cruyff football does in its programs. How much time do your coaches spend coaching controls, moves, and turns, he's put it, or ball mastery, we could frame it as? Is it something that you do in isolation, or is it more generally game-based training?
Yeah, at the expense of undermining Cuerva coaching, which I know the United States has for many years and is quite popular worldwide, very little, to be fair. Okay. And it's connected to what James spoke about, and that is, I've seen the United States and traveled a lot now and seen a lot of kids that can step over the ball 50 times. But in context, we don't seem to be able to do it on the world stage at the appropriate time. So we try, and I think Barcelona, if I'm fair, I don't want to speak for Barcelona, but I've had my son go through that program for a few years, and I have fellow coaches that are there now. A lot of what I think Barcelona does well is to put the skills into an applied format through the game. So the decision making is associated with the use of a given skill. So the isolation of skills, I think, is important. It's going to be needed, but lining everybody up and spending a whole session on, as you mentioned, one turn or one step over, I don't think is as valuable as putting that skill into context and asking players to find out when is the most appropriate time to create space for yourself by using a particular move, be it a step over move or any other of the selected moves. I think if you look historically, some of the best players that we consider most creative did have a huge arsenal of moves. To be fair, we talk about, you need an arsenal of 50 moves, but I mean, if you're going to play wing and you can get down the wing and center, or you can cut it back, you can, Waddle out of England. I watched him in Tottenham for many years. He had like 3 moves. But believe me, he could do those moves brilliantly and get past the defender. Johan's favorite move was to look at a defender one-on-one and then just kind of a little hip fake and then get by him and bring on the next one. So I think we get a little bit off track when we suggest that if you can do 100 moves in isolation in your backyard, that's going to make you an effective and creative player. Because ultimately, and I think Barcelona does this well, from a very young age, you want the children into solving problems, solving issues, recognizing patterns of play, as I like to call them, recognizing patterns of play and recognizing what do I utilize within my skill set to execute a successful resolution. And that may be a player with 5 signature kind of moves to get him left, get him right, get him out. I mean, Xavi, I think if you counted the number of moves that Xavi had, it's probably not 50, but does he do 5 moves to work through different scenarios perfectly well and not lose the ball? Yeah, so I'm a little torn by that, but I would say that putting the skills in an applied environment and then having the players get accustomed, as James said, get them accustomed to using that so that they own it. It would be more important than me teaching them 100 or buying 100 drills for £5 and having them do it. So also, when you talk about skills training, Johan speaks about this a lot. A lot can be done with a ball and a wall, right? So when you're in the neighborhood and you're waiting for the friends to show up, you're at the park, usually you can find a ball and a wall. And with a ball and a wall, you can do a lot of technique work that maybe isn't about step overs, but it's about being able to pass the ball with several parts of your foot. And something that I think is critically important that's underestimated even today in training is the time you spent on weak foot training. I here in Spain even, surprisingly, I mean, the coaches don't demand, and the kids themselves will not put themselves in a circumstance where they're vulnerable. So unless a coach encourages risk, accepts failure as part of the process, I don't think you will have very creative players when the pressure is particularly placed upon them in a match situation. And that's why I think training and the games that you create around training are critically important. It has to be in a safe environment, it has to be a creative environment, and you're going to have to fall on your face a few times. And when you do that, if the coach is screaming down your neck, you will avoid risk-taking. And when you avoid risk-taking as a player, you shut off your channels of your own creativity. And there's very little left that I think you can own as a player other than going on a pitch and trying not to make mistakes. And that's different than going on the pitch and trying to, as James said quite well, express yourself along with your teammates.
I think that comes, and a lot of what we do at the club I'm working at is around appropriate decision making. And I think a lot of that comes back down to players recognizing scenarios, recognizing moments in the game, recognizing what the right solution is. And I think as a coach, being prepared to let them fail over and over again. That sort of idea leads on to another question we've got, or I think it was from Zach. How does coaching or coaching styles differ? Sorry, not that one. It was in regard to mental toughness from George. Apologies. How do you teach that in youngsters? And I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine today around that. Is it something that's innate and it's within certain players that they have a little bit about them, as a lot of coaches will say? Do they have a level of aggression? How do they breed toughness? And I think the best coach I've spoken to about that was Mick Beale at Liverpool, when he said you have to push your players in training to a point where they will break occasionally. And it's not to have them constantly fail, but it's to push them, whether it's working on their 1v1s in a game, whether it's working on a technique within a game that they have to hone or improve. I think we have to push our players to fail in order to get the best out of them, and they need to know how far they can go. So the question around mental toughness, Jimmy, is one I want to throw back to you. Is it something that we can coach? Is it something you believe is innate? It's the nature versus nurture debate. And what's your view on that one?
Well, it's an interesting one, and a lot of the research around it has been done in like the school that I'm part of at UQ. And the first thing they tried to do there was to define actually what mental toughness is, and what it means to people. And I think that's one of the hardest things with mental toughness, with creativity. It's like there are these terms that we kind of have a very general understanding of what they are, but are they actions? Is it something that is very much within a person? Is it characteristics that they display? So look, it's a really tough one, but I would go back to the idea of being self-directed and inspiring self-directed motivation, or self-determined motivation, as it's called, because I think when you're self-determined, you have a feeling of ownership over your game, and a feeling that you can make a difference in the game, then you're going to keep going. So I think being self-directed, and then also having something akin to a growth mindset, whereby you value effort above all else, then you'll find you have players that keep going and have a never say die attitude. It's not necessarily mental toughness. I mean, for example, we can look at someone like Luis Suarez, and you could go, the guy just keeps going and going and pressing, and there's very much a never say die attitude there, or that's what it seems to be when he plays. But at the same time, he has moments of madness. So from one point of view, you go, man, the guy is so mentally tough because he just keeps going and going. He never stops. His pressing is phenomenal. And he never thinks the game is over. But then on the other side of the coin, you go, well, he's not mentally tough because there are moments whereby he snaps and things go, completely the wrong direction. So if we can help our players to become more self-directed and have self-directed motivation, then that's key for me. And that comes from creating environments whereby they can feel autonomy, like they've got some choice, whereby they can feel there's a belonging within the team and with the coach, and they can feel competent, so successful as well. So I think we have an interesting balance again between letting players fail and also making sure that they go away with a sense of success and competence at the end of the session as well. So I think these are like competing ideas that kind of wax and wane. So like, we might go through a moment whereby we're like making it really difficult for a player and really challenging them, and they might go away with like low feelings of success or competence, but then the next week maybe it changes again. I think we just have to be aware, again, that development's not a straight line, and there's quite a few. Yeah.
And I would like to bring up something that I see Garth had mentioned about failure. I mean, repetitive failure is not what we're seeking, right? So it's not the idealism of failure that we're promoting. It makes it good. There's unproductive failure and there's productive failure. I think failure, as long as it's embraced as part of the process and then from which you learn. I mean, that's what we base a lot of our work out of a woman by the name of Carolyn Dweck out of Stanford, who's talked about resilience, being able to learn from mistakes and apply the lessons learned to the next situation. You do not want, as Garth suggests, the bad kind, which is just repetitive failure without solutions. And I think that can be encouraged by coaches in the environment, and very much is our responsibility to facilitate that.
And I think as a coach, you have to know when to go in and help. And I think it's a fine line where you can see a lot of coaches, particularly, I see them in academy environments, will go the other way, where coaches can just stand back and watch. And you think, well, we're letting the kids play, and that has its place. But I think you also have to know that line where you need to help. And if you're seeing that player who's failing over and over again and isn't solving that problem, then can you come in with a clever question or guide them to an answer that they're not getting? And I think that's something that fine line, it almost seems to be a trend in modern coach education, and there's a lot of talk around the difference between licenses in the UK, so an A license or a B license versus the youth modules, which are much more Q&A, much more guided, whereas the A license still traditionally more command style coaching. And the trend seems to be, and the discussion seems to be here, that we're going away from command, or command is a bad word. And this is another one I wanted to bring up with Jim. Can you go in and give a command through a question? Can you go in and use command style in a positive way? And the style or the moment that we coach is so critical to managing that failure for the player. So Jim, it's really a question for you, again, back on that idea. Can we use command? What sort of coaching styles are going to create an environment where we can manage that failure for players?
Okay, so the problem with command would be that it makes it harder for players to kind of self-direct. And to be self-determined, because they simply go, rather than being immersed in the problem and going and engaging with the problem in front of them, they start thinking, what does coach want me to do here? And that's the ultimate problem with too much command. So again, it's a balance, because I think, as you pointed out rightly there are times when we need to step in. But I think stepping in and commanding a player to do something, first of all, it's controlling. So from a motivational point of view, players start to feel like they have to do this for the coach, which is problematic. And then, second of all, the command style, I suppose, it simplifies the game in a way. And it takes what is in the moment a very complex problem for the player, because football's a complex game, and I think, as Johan says, Todd, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's playing football is simple, but playing simple football is one of the hardest things there is. And I think that's a wonderful quote, because it recognizes the complexity of the game in trying to play it in a simple way. And I think when we come in and we command something, we're basically going, this is a simple problem, and this is the answer for it, and this is what you need to do. And in that moment, you kind of you kind of strip back all the complexity, and it's a way of incentivizing the player to do something that makes them think that the game is simple as well. When in reality we should be embracing the complexity. And again, another idea within creativity and the environments that we need to create or can create is that the more opportunities that a player has when they have the ball, the more creative they can be in what they do with it. And this comes back to Todd's idea or the discussion around having a skill set. And it also comes or dovetails nicely with possession football, because the more teammates you have making angles and being in a position to receive a pass, the more passes you can make. The better your technical repertoire, the more things you can do with the ball, the more options you have to dribble with the ball as well. And I think creative behavior comes from being able to see all of these options and take all of that in and then make a decision based upon that, and having the freedom to do that. So I think that's the game in all its complexity, and that's giving the player the freedom to go and express themselves based upon what they see. Whereas the command is like narrowing the focus onto this is what we'd like you to do. So all the passing options and all the options to dribble and stuff, players stop seeing them basically. Players just start they just start looking for what they think the coach wants from them. It's the danger.
Okay. I want to go back to Todd in regard to Cruyff football, and I guess more about what you guys do. You have a point of difference in individual player development. How important is mindset, which you sort of both referred to, and is it something you work on within your programs?
Yeah, and I responded to Simon on the chat here, if I did correctly. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, you've done well.
The role of the role of the skill set. I think there's a challenge, and that is when you look and you say, well, we can't play soccer until we learn to kick a ball, and by extension, you have to spend all the time and energy to teach them all the skills before they play. I think we run the risk of losing children for coming to play. Children can play. They can play the moment, and they play without us. If I go down the street here in the park, it's not like they're checking into the park with a pass that says I can pass with the inside or the outside of my foot or both feet before I play. They play, some better and some others. So I think what you have to do is simultaneously build decision making with the skill set. And so the way that we approach that is, and keep in mind we also make distinction between, say, grassroots youth soccer and the professional academies with which we work. Okay, so a professional academy is a unique animal, right? So if you take Ajax or any, you might have 220 children in the academy that have already been pre-selected to be in that academy, and there's a whole different dynamic about what that academy is for, which is specifically to bring players to the first team. That's a vast cry from being out there. If many of our audience are youth coaches at a club where the agenda is something different. So I want to make that distinction because I think we make the mistake too often of taking it too seriously too soon and imposing these skill sets that you need and the tactical elements that you need, where the statistics I just received from Kevin Payne of the U.S. Soccer was that 75% of the children in the United States are dropping out of soccer by the age of 13. 75. And what is the number one reason? They're not having fun anymore. Yeah. So I always caution behind being too serious about the coaching, because I think as James referred to, it has to be fun. Now, what do we do at Cruyff Football with respect to individuals? Well, keep in mind that this is a professional academy. So we are looking from the recruiting process into the demonstration of their ability to learn. Are they, in the course of a couple of years that are guaranteed within a typical academy before they're given the green light to continue or the red light to go home, are they demonstrating a capacity to embrace, learn, grow, and take on the challenges of competitive football that are going to be confronting them? And so how does that work? Well, we talk about not focusing on the development of teams, but focusing on the development of individuals within the team concept, right, or within the team context. So is it very important that Barcelona wins the under-12 league? They probably will, because they picked all the better players from every other club that they play against and from other places. So I always say I said this to the coaches at Ajax, I said, listen, I think I could probably put my grandmother who passed away 30 years ago on the bench this weekend at Barcelona, and she'd get her first win. I mean, the rubric, the results cannot be the rubric by which we judge ourselves as coaches. The players come to us at any level with a baseline of skill sets and conceptual understanding of the game. That's our baseline. And if we're a good coach, we will use that baseline and take the player several steps further from that baseline during their time with us. And so the only way I can do that is to understand what is the individual baseline of each and every player on my squad of 18 or 20 players. If I don't know that, I'm left to judge my success on wins and losses. But I've seen many coaches win and not develop players, so I don't think it's appropriate metric, and I've written about this, I don't think it's appropriate metric to use it. I think we have to say, have we maximized the potential of each and every individual in our charge? And then later we'll determine if that's good enough for first flight football or recreational football or adult league football, right? Or co-ed, intramural football. That should not be the worry for the majority of us as coaches. It should be, have I given you an experience by which you can learn, grow, develop, and engage with the game longer and well beyond your 12th birthday, which is where we're losing many of them. I imagine in other parts of the world as well. So think of the individual, think about taking them to their potential, and then worry later whether that potential is good enough to be on the first team pitch at Barcelona, or whether it's just enough to give them a rewarding experience and use that for the rest of their lives for something positive. So
I think that reflects how
hard for us as coaches to do that sometimes, but that's how we focus, even at a professional level, on the individual within the team context.
Absolutely, and I think that reflects the conversation, I guess, that started between our two companies is that we're trying to maximize the potential of every individual, and I think a lot of what you go back to is relative to the climate these players are in, and I know Jimmy's got a real passion for motivational climates and that sort of area of the game. I work in academy football in the UK. I think it's a very intense environment. I still think there's a lot of extrinsic rewards. I still think there's a lot of fear in the environments for all players. And I was even having a conversation today with one of my colleagues around trust. And do the players in academies implicitly trust that the coaches have their best interests at heart? I question that. I don't know, because of the nature of the game. And yes, it's an academy's job to produce players for a first team, and there is a business about it once players get older. But I sort of think to myself, I wonder if there will ever be a club brave enough to say, we're going to sign a player at 9, which is mad in itself, really, and we're going to hold on to him until he's 16 or 17 or 18. We're going to persist, and we're going to let that player go across that, as Jimmy said earlier, that non-linear journey, and stick with him and persist because he's in the environment. So, Jim, I guess following on from what Todd said around motivational climates, how can we create something, whether it's grassroots, whether it's elite? Is there something in the middle, or a perfect ideal that you believe in, or have a theory around, where we can get the best out of every individual and give them the experience that Todd's talking about?
Well, yeah, I think an interesting way to think about it, though, is to think outside of the academy, or think outside of your training session. And I think your point, Dave, is a really interesting one about signing a player on early and going, look, we're going to keep you. The reality of that is it might not be the best thing for the player. Because
comfort zone. Creates comfort zone, right?
Yeah, well, there's that, but what I'm thinking as well is that in an academy environment, a player might not be ready to be with that team. So, like, in an academy environment, you've got like the best players in the region, so it can be quite competitive and quite confronting for some players. So they might be in that environment, but they might not feel that they can express themselves. They might not feel that it's just within their peer relationships that it's a good space for them to be in. So I think as coaches as well, we have to recognize that maybe the best thing we can do for a player at 13 years old or 12 years old, as like crazy as it seems, is to actually go. You need to go and find somewhere just to enjoy your football. The academy environment's not right for you at the moment. So in the short term, maybe we have to recognize that the academy environment might not be right for them, and then their journey might be to go away from the academy for a couple of years and then come back again. So I think looking at each individual and their journey as like really kind of changeable is an interesting way to look at it. I think in terms of I think we need to think of coaching as well, and the couple of hours that we might have with a kid each week as an opportunity to inspire them to go away and play the game more and more. So again, thinking about what is outside of the training session and outside of the academy. And I think Todd's point about a ball on a wall is a great one. And this dovetails nicely with the idea of, do we need isolated training and isolated practice? Well, for me, kids definitely can benefit from that, but it should be completely self-directed. It should be them, not in a training session. It should be them at home, or them with a ball on a wall, just trying things and refining things that maybe they learned in a session, or maybe they tried in a training session, and then they decided they needed to go away and practice on it. They were inspired to do that. So can we think about our training sessions as opportunities to inspire our players to go and practice, or go and play in other environments as well?
So we're talking about creating independent learners here, aren't we? Creating players who are autonomous and have a drive to go away and work on something.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's one way of looking at it. And again, it's about the relationship that you can build with the player as a coach, and I think trust is a massive one, because we've talked about this before, but it seems like a lot of the best player development programs, the players truly believe that the coaches have their best interests at heart. And when you talk about creating self-direction, it needs the players to feel a sense of belonging, and a sense of kind of competence and success, and that comes from a relationship with a coach and trusting the coach's feedback at the same time, and then the coach giving you space to express yourself. So those things hopefully will lead to players wanting to go away and practice with the ball on the wall, and refining their technique because it's something that they value.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's an interesting... Sorry, Todd, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I was just reading the scroll, and some very good observations from people that are far smarter than I am, and how to approach this. And I know I just want to say hello to some of my former teammates and colleagues that are out there. I see scrolling down, so I think they should be leading the webinar. They're probably thinking that themselves as well. So, but I don't think we're creative enough in how we look at, and I know I made a general comment, and that came up in the scroll about the individual within the team context. And let me give you a little simple example, and there are many creative examples we can do. The other day I was at training, and there was a head coach and assistant coach at a very humble club with 2 volunteers. The head coach was running training, and the assistant coach was doing nothing but going to get the balls and sitting watching the head coach do the training. To me, that is a failure of maximizing the resources available to the team at that moment. What session is being run? Why not have the assistant pull out and teach the boy to open up his hips, or to use the angle of his foot that you're working on, or to teach him some element of the game that individual may need, where it may not be necessary for the whole team to do this. And I've seen this work as you can pull players. Let's give you an example of a player that I worked with, and I knew that he was one of the better players on the team. So I put restrictions on him in training. I said, okay, for the next 2 weeks, you're going to wear a yellow sock on your weak foot, because then I'll remember, I'll be able to see it and say, I want to see you play with your weak foot. Okay, he was actually an exceptional player. He didn't want to do it, and I said, but your standard, if you want to continue on in the game, is not your peers right now, because you're at the top of the pile. You're going to maybe go on and play high-level football. You have got to compare yourself with players that you're not seeing around you right now. And I can tell you, if you go into the next training environment, which will be a much more competitive one with 2 feet, you're going to be better. What is the reluctance? The reluctance is failure, vulnerability, shame. You know, who wants to put themselves in an environment because he's the best player? And I said, just give me a day then, 1 day, yellow sock, weak foot. And so the session went on as normal, but here I've crafted an individual training within the team training, and that's just with one coach. I mean, it's one silly example, but there are, I'm sure that the audience can think of many more examples by which you can individualize the training expectations within the team training without having to disrupt your whole, your training plan for the day.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that I see a lot in academy football, which is for the good. I think a lot of people are critical of what's happening in academies, but from what I've seen, there's plenty of positive change happening as well. And one of the big things that really I've learned as a coach up here is that working with the individual within the collective is one of the biggest challenges, and it is the objective of academies. That's the bottom line, really. But one thing we do at our club is to always give players an individual challenge, and the focus will be, can we dominate possession collectively? Can we be the best team on the park? Can we have the best individual on the park? That's obviously important from a club point of view, but can every player go out there with a challenge that is either something they're good at and they need to be better at, or something that they're failing or struggling with that they need to work on within that game? It's just another opportunity to practice. And I think that is something that tends to be fairly consistent across academies that I've seen both coaching for and against up here. It's something that I think is key, challenging that individual. Jimmy, you were going to jump in there as well?
Yeah, well, I just saw a comment from Jim earlier on talking about the challenge of teaching kind of innovation and creativity, and he makes a point about having a shared language, and I've often seen this talked about in the research, like with jazz musicians, and how like they improvise, but they have rules that allow them to improvise, and I think the idea of the individual within the team fits this idea quite nicely as well, and the idea of having like a playing style, because I think all of that creates a shared understanding with the players on the pitch, and then from that shared understanding, or that structure that's created, players can then move away from it and then do something unexpected, something innovative, and therefore that's where it's a moment of creativity within the game, and it can be as simple as a fullback having the ball and looking to play his holding midfielder 4 times, does it 4 times in a row, and then the 5th time he shapes to make that pass, the player in front of him goes to read it and he basically fakes it, drags the ball and goes around him. Now, without the structure in place of the centre midfielder looking to receive the ball, and the fact that he's done that 4 times previously, that moment would never have occurred. So I think that's a very simple example, but I think creating a shared understanding, so there are some kind of guidelines and some structure for the guys, for the team on the pitch is important as well, and its creativity emerges from that structure.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to move on to a topic that's our last webinar guest, Steve Lawrence, who's an expert in relative age effect, sent through via Twitter today, and that was around the coach as an instructor and the coach as a guide, or versus the coach as a guide. Now, some of you may have seen the really interesting article that received a lot of publicity. It was an interview with Arsene Wenger in the last week or so around him being an enabler for players to sort of express themselves and let themselves flourish on a football pitch. It's certainly my personal belief that as a coach we are facilitators, and obviously we're there to help, we're there to support, but we have to facilitate through creating an environment that lends itself to best practice, that lends itself to learning, that ideally, for me, my personal belief is a no-fear environment where players do feel safe to fail. You know, Todd, your thoughts, I guess, on the role of the coach as an instructor versus coach as a guide. Any sort of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, interesting enough, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently, and I think some of the failure is that we emphasize coaching rather than learning. Okay, because when you put on, when you're a coach, you're coming from it from, as James Reed referenced, a coach-centric point of view. What am I going to do today? What training am I going to structure? And sometimes we don't ask ourselves the question of what does it look like from the perspective of the learner? And I want to, if I'm a coach, like or in any business, you want to maximize your return on your investment, right? So if I have an hour and a half and it's 2 days a week or 1 day a week or 3 days a week, or in academy football, you may have that 5 days a week. You want to make sure that the activities you're doing are bringing about the most learning. And unfortunately, in my experience and in the coaching courses I've been, there are not many people that have studied the learning process, the process of inquiry, discovery, execution, and assessment that every child does naturally. And so I think what we need to do is think, and I agree with Steve's point, is we think, okay, if you're going to be a facilitator of somebody else's success, if you're going to maximize somebody else's potential, then really you better understand that individual and understand the learning process quite well. And unfortunately, I don't think they spend any time to speak of really understanding the learning process when I go get my credentials. I hope it's different today than it was years ago, but some of my friends that have taken recent courses says very little time is devoted to what is the natural learning process. And Steve will know well because his wife is head of Montessori International. Talks about, you know, this process. I've learned a lot from her. I mean, if we're going to focus on coaching, shouldn't we focus on learning as our fundamental craft and execute it so that it's aligned with what's happening naturally from the point of view of a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, or 10-year-old? And if we do that, I think ultimately you can choose the semantics you want. You're going to facilitate success. You're going to maximize potential, and you're going to be a guide, right? You're going to be someone, whatever the word is, that a player, as James mentions, trusts, that is working for their best interest. And I've seen it scroll here on the side as well, it's being critically important. When you have a child's trust, be it in a classroom or be it as a parent or whether be it as a coach at your club, you have the great potential to affect their growth. And so whether it's facilitator or coach, I'm more focused on, are you choosing, or are we choosing as coaches, the best exercise, the best use of time, the best use of drills, or whatever you would like to call, that maximizes learning. And unfortunately, still today, I see a lot of exercises that have nothing to do with learning and has everything to do with coaches thinking that they're producing learning. But in reality, they're not. I think we have to check ourselves. And we can learn from people that are not coaches, that are outside the world of football. We can learn from experts in the craft of education. But unfortunately, I think in football we're a little bit too insular, and we just think, well, this is the way it's always been done, and we'll keep going that direction. Why don't we ask the head of Montessori what it is about learning strategies, pedagogy, and the effectiveness of methodology? Because I think in football we remain pretty insular, and we end up talking about 4-4-2s or 4-3-3s ad nauseum. And if we're in youth football, we should be talking less about probably, 4-4-2s, and a little bit more about the basics elements of learning. And I think James's work on creativity, and that I know he's coming to Barcelona to further his PhD. I think we need to learn from people who are out there that can bring to football the greatest and latest knowledge that we understand about human development. And then take the next step and apply it to our coaching courses, our coaching practices in our own club back in California or in Pretoria.
Yeah, absolutely. I think speaking from an English point of view up here, there is a real positive change, I guess, in a lot of the courses, having done the youth modules here, and I think there's a much more rounded approach where teaching methodology and the ability to teach and understanding the learner is taking a much greater priority than perhaps it has in the past, which has got to be progress. And Jim, I want to get your thoughts on the topic, and also sort of lead into your blog, which you wrote recently, which has received some great reviews and feedback on Twitter in the last sort of couple of days after the website launch. So first of all, your thoughts around coach as instructor versus coach as a guide, and also a little bit about that blog, which is around key characteristics of the world's best coaches. Can you elaborate on your thoughts around those two ideas?
Yeah, for sure. So I think in an ideal world, the coach would be the guide. And they would be able to be hands-off, more than hands-on. And there's always going to be those moments. And they'd be able to teach through, as a lot of the guys are saying in the chat here, guided discovery, and teaching games for understanding, and using Q&A. However, the reality is that the players that come to sessions these days have been conditioned by education and some of the other structures we have in and around us to not think about what they're doing and to want to conform to what an adult is telling them. So the classic example being you ask a group of kids a question as a coach and you get like instant answers. So first of all, they haven't really thought about it, and second of all, you realize the answers are just what the kids think you want to hear.
Absolutely. It happens all the time.
Yeah, it does. It's crazy. So, and that's just what happens in terms of the way kids are educated outside of the coaching session. Maybe other forms of education, whether it be music, and not even education, just like being with peers as well, wanting acceptance and belonging. A lot of the time can end up in conforming, and they're just trying to build a relationship with you as the coach, but they're doing it in a way whereby they're not thinking. So we have to be clear about that and make sure that one of the things that we value is above anything else is open-mindedness, and that's our open-mindedness as coaches, and that's the open-mindedness of our players as well. We've really got to want to get their opinions. So to summarize, in an ideal world, we'd just be a guide the whole time. But the reality is, because of the expectations of players and also the expectations of parents watching our sessions as well, it can be very difficult not to use more traditional approaches, because that's what the players think they want. So it becomes a process of changing a player's understanding of what teaching is over the course of a season as well, and hopefully we can then get to a point whereby we do a lot more guiding and a lot less instructing.
Yeah. James, you raise a good point. I'll just tell you an interesting anecdote about that. When we went to train, I was serving as director of football in Chivas in Guadalajara. We did a preseason in Spain, and we were about 5 kilometers from the beach. But apparently, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, some team went to the beach to do preseason and then won the championship. So in Mexico, the first few days we got is, well, when are the players going to the beach? And John Van Schip, who's now coaching in Melbourne, a former Ajax and Dutch national player, was the head coach of Chivas at the time, and he said, what is it about the beach? And it came to be that, yeah, somebody went to the beach in preseason, and now every team in Mexico goes to the beach to preseason training. And so I asked I said, but that seems logical, great. So what? But every team in Mexico goes to the beach, and some of those teams at the bottom of the table, right? But culturally it was like, who are you people? You're not doing preseason training at the beach. And I said to the press, I said, well, we're 2 kilometers. If you'd like to go, enjoy. We'll be here at the training pitch. But it's not to be taken lightly, because in South Africa, I can tell you many more stories. You have to work within the culture, and you can take innovative steps. But if you just come in from the outside and start to throw innovation, at people that are not ready for change or managing change, you're going to be as much as a failure as a coach that doesn't change or try to change at all. One final anecdote about in learning, I think, James, you make good reference to this. A very specific example. Pep Guardiola, this was, a while ago now, in the early 90s when he was playing in Barcelona, the guy still used to play cards. And Johan said he'd look back in the bus or in the plane, and Pep would be reading a book. And all the other guys would tease him. Yeah, who's the little skinny nerd guy, in the back who's, reading a book? And he was reading about philosophy and Catalan literature and any number of things. And he was the crazy one, right? And then he's crazy till you're a genius, right? But even today, Pep Guardiola is an avid reader of literature beyond football literature, and it just goes to show, I think, not that you're a Pep fan or you are, but obviously he's been successful in his career on the field and off. I think if you take learning seriously and you make it lifelong learning and you model that, you will get people, including those parents, those difficult parents in California that are screaming about tournament results. You will slowly affect change, but it has to be step by step. I think it's a very good point you raised, James.
Yeah, but I think you've taken the point a step further, and I think that modelling is absolutely crucial. So yeah, I think we have to embody what it is, the values that we want to get across to our players. We have to embody them. So I think that's a great example of that. So as coaches, if we want our players to learn and develop as people, then we have to be learning and developing as people, which goes back to the blog post that you mentioned, Dave, which highlighted the key characteristics of high performance coaches, and the first one being that they read a lot. And obviously, Todd, you've backed that up brilliantly with an example from Pep Guardiola. And I think as well, in that example, it's not necessarily always reading about football, because the next point that was made in the blog is that coaches look to develop themselves, and they look to understand themselves and how to embody their values. So in that one anecdote about Pep, I think we see those first 2 key attributes coming out. It's kind of amazing.
I'll give you one more, because it breaks down this macho stereotype vision we have of coaches screaming up and down the sideline, like Bobby Knight of basketball back in the United States when I grew up. Rinus Michels, he was known as the general, right? Very disciplined, also known as one of the architects of total football, and quite successful in coach. Obviously, he's passed away years ago. But I think people were surprised to know, I learned it from Johan, is that he would go home and he sang beautifully. He would sing ballads to his wife. I mean, this is the general, right? This is the guy that was no nonsense, stereotypical, right out of stone, strong jaw coach that was going to keep order of all these crazy hippies playing football, of which Johan Cruyff was one of them, right? But this gentleman, when he was off the pitch, was a gentleman. He was a full gentleman who loved the arts, would go to music and sing beautifully. It doesn't align with the macho, but it's surprising how many top-level coaches I've been exposed to who, you think, well, they're only, and it's true, their passion is football, but they are remarkably people that also have families. And I think sometimes when we get into the midst of coaching, sometimes with our kids, we forget they also have, they're the son or the daughter or the father or the stepson or cousin of somebody. And maybe that day of our training isn't the highest priority of what's going on in their lives. And if we're smart enough and open enough, that I think that applies well to top flight football all the way through. One more example. A boy at Ajax was kind of diagnosed as being apathetic. The club, or some coaches in his group thought he just lost his passion for the game. Just didn't seem to be motivated. So the discussion was maybe it's time for him to leave the Ajax ranks and go home, and wish him well, but recognize he didn't have the mindset and the toughness that you want for the red and white jersey. Come to find out, the nutritionist did analysis, and he was short on vitamin D. Now, I don't know much about vitamin D, but I do know that it's enough to provide energy. So the nutritionist did this assessment, changed his diet, provided the vitamin D deficiency that he was having, and guess what? He went back on the pitch, and he was motivated, and he was Ajax material, and he was mentally tough again. So I think we have to be careful about approaching, and if you do that at an individual level, and you look for solutions at an individual level, the irony is your team ends up being more successful. And that's an interesting message I've learned from some of the top coaches I've had a chance to listen to and watch in practice. It's not that dissimilar. If you're scrolling down and you're in the middle of your country somewhere or your club thinking that where you are is completely different, I can tell you that everywhere I've seen that I've been, and that's been about 20 different countries now, kids are more similar when they come around the ball than they are different. And it's our responsibility to bring that out.
Indeed. Well, look, guys, we're well over the hour we'd sort of allocated, and I think there's plenty of topics that we could continue. Todd, we'll hopefully be able to grab you for another webinar in 2016. We've got a few lined up. So, look, guys, I want to thank both of you. Before we sign out tonight, I just want to let all our viewers know that, to check out our new site at playerdevelopmentproject.com. We've had thousands of people over the weekend get involved already, and Jimmy Vaughan's article that we've just spoken about, the key characteristics of the world's best coaches, is well worth a look. You can sign up for future webinars through the site, and we have two great events coming up, the first of which will be with Susan Salzbrenner and Mads Davison discussing cultural intelligence in football, and then we've got John O'Sullivan and Eric Imler who are joining us from the States discussing all things player development in the States, and we're going to be talking to John, who's the founder of Changing the Game project. Those are both coming up in 2 and 4 weeks respectively. We're giving the opportunity to our community to do a free 30-day trial with a membership. They can cancel at any time. Prices range from $3.99 to $8.99 a month. That's US dollars. Gold members will have free access to all webinar events and exclusive content through the magazine. Jump on the site, have a bit of an explore, and you can see how it all works. Final point, we value all feedback, and we really want to hear from you guys as to how you think we're going, what you're looking to read, or if there's any topics you'd love to see covered or any experts you want us to connect with. We'll do our best to use the Cruyff network, our academic network, and our football network throughout Australia, the States, New Zealand, and England, of course. So we'll try and continue to work hard for our community. And yeah, just feel free to join us. So hopefully you guys enjoy the new website. Hopefully you enjoyed tonight. And Todd, it was great to get some insight from you as to what Cruyff football does and some stories and anecdotes around Johan and the people he's been involved in. So, Jimmy, thank you very much. Todd, thank you so much for your time. And thanks very much to everyone who joined us tonight. We'll see you soon.
All right, cheers. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.